Let me explain and demonstrate in this London street scene the 5 things I focus on when I'm doing a freehand ink sketching of a scene like this. And can I say, this is the same approach I take whether I'm drawing from a photo or in real life. The 5 things I focus on to help me to get an accurate and credible a view of a street scene with the perspective elements being correct as I possibly can. The first thing always is to take note of where the eye level is. Now this always makes us have a good look whether the ground is level or not, and whether we think that the photo, if we're looking at a photo, particularly if we didn't take it, was actually taken by someone standing on the same level as the people that we see. But if, as in this case, that was the case, then the average size person is going to end up having their eyes line up the average size adult with eye level across the entire scene. That is a big help. But if the ground is uneven, then we need to find where the vanishing points meet up. We need to find 2 different vanishing points, or approximately where they would be, and make that our line. But either way, it is very good at this stage to have sorted out where eye level is, because above that the lines start to angle upwards, and below that they start to angle in the other direction. And that all makes sense with where the people's eyes are in this case. And I'm sorry, I've just realized I didn't set the focus, so every time I put my hand over the reference, it's going to fuzz as the camera focused on my hand. Sorry about that. But having said that, I then focus on the most extreme angles, because the most extreme angles are going to be the most important to draw, and in some ways the most difficult to draw accurately. Over and over again, I see in drawings, the most extreme angles, the furthest ones from eye level, not angled enough. And we need to pay attention to both sides of the street when we have both sides, because invariably on one side, it's going to be angled much more. In this case, on the left-hand side, where those lines are starting to look pretty almost vertical when we get up towards the top of the building. So this is what I need to do first, because I can't draw the angles that I haven't seen. Sometimes I'll put my pen on the angle before I start to draw, just to make me be confronted a little more with how extreme it is. Now, having said that, and the other thing is also with eye level is where there are curved horizontal lines. And we have 2 towers on opposite sides of an intersection. So we need to notice that those horizontal, in inverted commas, lines curve more and more the lines between the rows of windows as they move up higher from eye level. Having said that, we now start to draw it. This brings me into the second issue, which is foreshortening. Now, where we have a continuous line of buildings, as we have largely here, then we need to pay attention to how everything narrows as it moves further away. And so I start, as I often do, drawing something that's very close, and I use a thicker pen. I used a 0.3mm pen. You can see the size pen on the nibs on the barrel, down near the nibs, if I don't mention and you're wondering. So I've just switched to a 0.1. But I have used a 0.3 to do this closer section to help give a sense that it is closer. But I need to make sure I narrow the windows as they move further along, down, away from me. Perspective isn't just that the height of things reduces, that things get shorter, but they get narrower as well. And the gaps between things, such as windows, get narrower as well. So I need to combine that with this. Please hit the like button if you're finding this drawing and this commentary interesting. That will really help me. Why not hit it now before you forget or change your mind? So I've done these first sections. Now notice I haven't actually gone down to street level. And that's because street level is usually, I think, the most complex part. And I find it easier to keep everything in scale, all the parts the right size in relation to each other, if I do the street level last, because then I can reference, in a sense, the whole rest of the scene. But if I'm drawing a person here, a person there, a bus stop, it's very easy at the start to not get them in the right alignment with each other and the right scale, and to get a wrong looking perspective. And then it can be difficult, if not impossible, to draw the buildings consistent with that. So because in the end the buildings are visually going to be the most prominent part of this, they're the part I want to make sure is correct. And I need the perspective angles looking as though they're all going to the one vanishing point. And I need to make sure that the foreshortening is consistent with that the foreshortening is appropriate for how far down the street we're going. And of course, when we get on the other side of that crossroad, the width of the buildings is going to become almost nothing unless it's a very, very long building, because everything is becoming compressed so much. So I need to think about foreshortening as well. And I need to observe it before I start to draw it. Now, the third element is something that I normally just call the effect of distance or a sense of depth. But it is, you may hear it referred to as atmospheric perspective. And that's the sense of how things appear to change. Our visual perception of things change as they move further away. We see less detail, we have less clarity, we see less contrast because values start to lighten relative to that same value closer. One way I try and create this atmospheric perspective to create the sense, the visual feel of distance, is to change my pens as I move further away, as well as then combining that pen difference with less detail and a lighter touch, a lighter way of drawing. So you can see this when you compare what you can see on the right hand side of that side of the street and the furthest buildings. But even the detail on the closest building to the right hand side and then the next building, the first one I actually drew, there is slightly less clarity, less perception as to what's happening there. And there's more just trying to draw the effect of the architecture. Now on this side of the street, I've come back to using my 0.3 because this is actually closer than the building on the other side of the street. So I could have used a 0.4 really, or even a 0.5 if I'd wanted to, but I didn't want it to get too inky. So this is where the real challenges for perspective angles are. So we really need to pay attention and work hard. What I normally do, and it may be a bit fast because this is about 4¼ times my drawing speed, but what I'm actually doing most of the time is I put a dot on the paper and then I use my pen to check that angle with whatever that dot's joining up with. And then I slide it across to the photo to see, does it look the same? But I always do a dot first because that's training my sense of observation. And then it gives me an immediate check on whether I was accurate or not. And that lets me know whether I need to look a bit longer before I put the dot, or just to refine my skill in doing this. So I find that a very helpful thing to do. And in life, we can't slide the pen across, but we can hold it up in front of us at the angle of whatever we're looking at and bring it straight down onto the paper. Now, that building I just did there on the left-hand side, the furthest part, you can see that there's very little detail there. I've really suggested the windows and the shadows that get cast by the upper horizontal section of each window. And now I have another curved corner, and so the curvature increases, becomes rounder as it gets higher. So I'm trying to have a sense of that as well. And this side of the street isn't the main one, so visually it's not the main one. I don't know what it is in real life. So I'm not wanting to get bogged down with too much detail, even though it is significantly closer than the other rounded corner. So these are all the things we get to make decisions about, because the marks we put and the way we put them on the paper, if there is a consistency, will help to guide anyone looking at our scene. It will help to guide their eyes. So it will attract certain parts to certain parts more than others. Now I just picked up a 0.3 instead of a 0.03 and did that line there. So I'm spit and chips at the moment, as we say. I was looking at doing the lamppost, but I also decided that I can't do that lamppost until I have a stronger sense of where the footpath's going to be, because it needs to line up on the footpath. And in a sense, I don't know, I can see that, or that I don't have quite enough width across my scene now. I've crept wider than I would have liked, and therefore I can't be sure that lamppost is going to drop down and look in a credible place on the footpath. And so now I've become aware of the fact that I haven't done anything to do with ground level, and I also realised that I haven't done the thing that I should have done for eye level once I got near to ground level, which was to put a dotted line across the eye level line. I don't mean a solid dotted line, I'm doing it now, but I should have done it sooner. It would have helped me position all the ground level things better. So now another important thing. Now I start by drawing these figures too small, but I draw figures in a way, and particularly by making the heads small, I draw them in a way that I can easily make them, well, not easily, but I can usually make them larger if I think the scale is wrong. Because scale is one of the other 5 points. I need to make sure that my scale is correct, especially when it comes to ground level. It needs to look like any person walking along at ground level could walk into a door and it looks like it's the right size. It's not a giant door, unless it really is a giant door, or they wouldn't be banging their head on the top of the door frame when they walk in. So you can see what I've done now. I've worked out, well, I can actually position that lamppost. And again, with scale, it ties in with what we're talking about now. The other important scale thing is where there are cars on the road with the shops on each side and with pedestrians walking. Now, I'm not a great vehicle drawer, and in fact, one of the end things I do is to put that ambulance in. It's a nice little scene in the intersection because it kind of blocks a lot of detail that might have been a bit tough to get completely accurate. So you can see me now having made my furthest figures. I think what I did from memory was I basically put shoulders where the head would been and then stuck a new head on top, and some of the adults became children. So that's the way I kind of avoided having to do too much. And it can be good to have a closer figure as well, if our scale will let us do a closer figure accurately. Now, the other thing I've not done is I haven't fussed too much detail too close at ground level, because then it becomes so cluttered we can't see anything. And if we've got people walking along the street, we want the people to have a sense of separation from the facade behind them. And so you can see what I've done. Now, I do a little bit more, but this is what I'm talking about in broad terms. The other thing I haven't mentioned is simply alignment. And by alignment, I mean vertical and horizontal. But in this case, mostly horizontal alignment. When I began to do the buildings on the left-hand side, I looked to see where they lined up with the buildings on the right-hand side that I'd already drawn. Now, as the drawing progresses, I'm aware that my scale may not be totally consistent, and therefore I tend to align with things that are geographically close. So when I drew that first building on the left-hand side, I aligned it with the buildings on the right-hand side. But when I was doing that rounded tower on the left-hand side, I aligned it with the rounded tower on the right-hand side, or the corner of that first building I started with, because that is where I want it to line up with a little bit more. So now I switch to a 0.3. This is the finest pen I use. So you can see I've had to cramp a little bit. Now I decided that my ambulance was too big, and I make it a bit smaller by just bringing the building down on top of it. The building that's, I'm not sure that I should have noticed. I suspect now I actually should have just left it. Sometimes leaving things that aren't quite right attracts less attention than pouring a lot of ink over them and making them look overworked. If I had that choice again, I don't think I'd worry about it, because it's clearly some sort of larger vehicle. I think I got concerned that on the reference it was clearly quite a bit smaller, and that encouraged me to try and fix it. But I think in terms of how it looked in my drawing, it wasn't a problem that needed to be fixed. So now I'm a little contrast at ground level so it doesn't look totally uncooked. And a few lines, don't leave a roadway completely empty, because they're often taking up a lot of width at ground level, at the lower level of our drawing. So now I get to the tricky part, which is this figure sitting here. Now it's tricky for me because, again, like cars, figures are not as strong as trees and rocks and buildings. But I need to have someone perched there. I decide to add a figure looking away from me as well, which helps give us a stronger sense. And by having that figure, basically a white top, draws the eye away from the less successful, more complex figure. And now I'm trying to make that a little bit, that ambulance a little bit shorter. I think I should have just left it. But anyway, it's good to explore options, possibilities. Please hit the like button for me if you're finding this interesting, and let me know of your experience. I'll leave this reference, of course, on my channel community page. One of my family is in the UK and they took this for me, which I greatly appreciate. So why not have a go? You don't even have to draw the whole thing. Just draw those two closest buildings on the right-hand side, or perhaps just those couple on the left-hand side, to get practice when we don't have time commitment or the mental capacity to do a whole more complex scene. If we master doing some of the smaller elements, then at some stage we can bring them together more successfully. So why not give it a go? But in the end, whatever you do, however it turns out, perspective or not, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.